On today's show, Lynden Lakovic, bigger, better, and already making waves.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the Capitals' success at the draft. Not just this season, but I'm going to say in the past few seasons. But there's a trend that we're noticing. What is that trend? Big frames, grit, and heavy hockey. That is the Capitals' formula for success. We'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about Andrew Cristall and how it's my belief that it is going to be his season for the Capitals. And he's going to be doing it down one tooth. Similar to the Great Eight. Are there any other similarities? But just to get it going here, we're talking about Lynden Lakovic. And the Capitals player that was drafted in the first round, 27th overall. And it kind of ties in with the theme of the show, is the Capitals, generally speaking here as of late, have drafted bigger players. And oftentimes on this show, I reference a prototypical Capital. And some people would say, well, what is that? You know, if you take a look at it, Tom Wilson, you take a look at Ryan Leonard, Lynden Lakovic, not just to name a few, that the Capitals as of late have kind of leaned into the bigger players. So what is behind that, and what kind of waves has Lynden Lakovic already been making here? But, you take a look at it, it wasn't that long ago. The draft seemed like just the other day, and the Capitals had some decisions and ultimately a bit of luck to a certain extent in what player would be available. But the Capitals draft pick this past season, or this past summer rather, is Lynden Lakovic, drafted number 27th. And like I said, prototypical Capital, listed at 6'4". But he appeared bigger than that. If you caught him next to GM Chris Patrick during development camp, yeah, he's looking eye to eye with the guy, and Patrick is 6'5". And, already a lot to like about that is a bigger, stronger player, not necessarily a fighter, but a guy that is not going to get driven off the puck as easy. And it's just not that. The skill set that we saw from him was quite something. So maybe the combine was about an inch off if we're going to talk about his height. I mean, it's not the first time the NHL round those numbers up in a kid's favor. But sometimes they just like to maybe tip the scales a little bit to make them appear bigger than they are. But seriously, his size stands out. And Patrick even said he's bigger than he expected. That's not something you hear every day when you're talking about an 18-year-old player coming out of junior. And I think a guy, if you take a look at the stats, if you take a look at the video, uses his size to his advantage. Now, Lakovic's year with Moose Jaw was, well, a bit of a mixed bag. The team struggled. They sold off their vets, but that left Lakovic in charge, and that made him the captain. And that right there, that leadership experience at 18 is huge. And, it speaks a lot about his play. Some players just go out there and go about their business. But for him, he went out there and was a leader for a team that wasn't that great. To stand out on a really poor team, I think speaks volumes, and I think is ultimately what got the attention of the scouts and Ross Mahoney. And Mahoney admitted he was kind of sweating it out during the draft, thought Lakovic might be gone before 27. And that's kind of a common theme with the last few drafts as well, as that was said about Cristall and Miroshnichenko as well. If you take a look at him, like we know he was drafted 27th overall, his lowest ranking was 23rd on most public boards. And that could have gone in, he could have gone in the teens. So the Caps, they feel like they got a bit of a steal here. He's a name that has not been spoke about in the bigger circles as much around the NHLs because, it's 27. It's not in the top 10, as we remember when Ryan Leonard was selected and all the buzz that surrounded him. But he is not going to be a player that's going to help the Capitals next year. It might be a bit, but at some point, he is going to be a part of a truly big Capitals team. Can you imagine Wilson? Can you imagine Lakovic and Leonard all on the ice at the same time? A huge group, a team to be reckoned with, that is for sure. You watch Lakovic on the ice at development camp, and what was apparent was his size, power, and, let's get away from just his size here. The shot. He stands out. And off the ice, super likable kid from what I saw in the videos and interviews, said the 4th of July fireworks at the monument were quote unquote surreal, said the Caps are treating him quote unquote amazing. And you love hearing that from a new guy. Kind of fits the bill of the young and mature trend that we see with the young NHL players. We saw the same thing with Cole Hutson. And I'm going to say that in the Break the Ice podcast with Mike Vogel, that Andrew Cristall, all very mature guys for their age. And I say that thinking back to when I was that age, 18 years old, definitely not nearly as mature as these guys are. But I think speaks volumes about the development of these young players. But to say I'm excited about Lakovic is an understatement. And it's just being patient and the understanding that these guys are not going to be ready to go right out of the gate. And one of the things I've spoke about on the show is it's better off to just be patient. If we kind of can draw lines to Ryan Leonard, for example, and Andrew Cristall, two players that I think greatly benefited from their extra time in development, whether it's Ryan Leonard at Boston College or it was Cristall with the Spokane Chiefs, that two players that were good, I think, were that much better because they had extra time and enough time on the ice to develop. Because as much as we might have wanted one of those younger players earlier in the season last year, I don't think they would have had nearly as much ice time, and nothing will stunt the growth of a player than playing minimal minutes or sitting up in the press box. We don't want Leonard or at some point Lynden Lakovic, these kind of guys, to be on the big team, but sitting from up in the press box. That is going to do nothing for them except fatten their bank account. And at this point, I want great players that are really ready to help contribute and help this team win hockey games, because there's going to be big changes and the future is bright. And Lynden Lakovic is one of those players that's going to truly elevate this team to great levels. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Andrew Cristall. One tooth down, the toothless wonder. What's the latest with Cristall? I'll discuss straight ahead. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch is more than a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. And the thing I like about it is you can kind of see where you're spending money, where you're spending it wisely, and maybe where you're not spending it so wisely. In my case, I realized I was spending too much money on going out to eat or food delivery. Now I don't do that. And if you have a significant other in your life, you can actually plan your financial future and present together. There is a lot to like about Monarch Money. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So Andrew Cristall, Yes, I've spoke quite a bit about him here, and he's an exciting player. And I think, kind of like how I talked about Connor McMichael, I think there's a distinct possibility he makes the team. If you're an everydayer of the show, you remember a couple summers ago when I said it needs to be the season for Connor McMichael. I have that feeling about Andrew Cristall. And the unique position I'll talk about later is hopefully, fingers and toes crossed, that he can be ready to join the Capitals, the big team. But this season, a great opportunity just based on his age that if he is not good to go, he can play in Hershey. But what's the latest with his development? Another likable, mature guy. Let's talk about Andrew Cristall in segment number 2 here. And so let's shift gears and talk about a player that's generating a lot of buzz and another common denominator. As this team for the long time was revered as old as far as the roster is concerned. But they're creating quite a bit of buzz because the guys that are brewing, the guys that are percolating to join this team in the next couple of years are going to make this team a formidable opponent. And you take a look back on Cristall, the very fact that he didn't go higher in the draft, the biggest knock on him, all skill, not enough speed. We remember that, right? But man, if there's one thing that he keeps doing, it's producing. And he showed up at development camp, 3rd time now, missing a front tooth. A bit of, similar to Alex Ovechkin, took a high stick last year and never replaced it. Has a fake denture, but doesn't wear it. Says, quote, Ovi doesn't wear one, so I don't need to either. So it's interesting that, a lot of people like to emulate Alex Ovechkin for a lot of different things, and being a toothless player or missing a tooth, that is another interesting attribute as well. But Cristall is coming off, the excitement isn't, it does not come from anywhere. It is deeply rooted with his monster WHL season, 132 points. Let me say that again, 132. Led the league, was nearly on the NHL roster last year, got sent back to Kelowna, then traded to Spokane midseason, and just kept torching goalies. And I think it's important to, tamper expectations here a little bit because, like I say, jumping from the juniors to the NHL, it's not always a seamless transition, but I think that he is deserving of the opportunity. Again, one of the last players cut last season. It's exciting to think about. And now GM Chris Patrick says if Cristall has a camp like he did last year, the coaches are going to have to consider keeping him on the big team, the Capitals. And I think there is a distinct possibility. Listen, the Capitals tried to acquire a big name veteran or two and came up swings and misses, acquired some depth pieces that'll either be on with Washington or down in Hershey. That it does appear that this team is pivoting into a more of a younger direction. For me, I like it. I don't like to keep kicking the can. Like, this team is young and it's going to be good in years to come. We need to make good on that because historically the Capitals have not always done that. There's been times here in recent history where they've been in win now mode, where they're trading prospects away to acquire, this veteran that's going to give them, a little bit extra offensive power, better blue line, something to that extent. But I think the development of this young team needs to be on the front burner and be of paramount importance. We need to take after this, young group of players and make sure that they're ready to go, that when the big names like Ovechkin, Carlson, these kind of guys, they sail off into the sunset, that the Capitals, the organization, is in good hands. But like I said, the good thing, if he's not ready for the Capitals, he can play in Hershey. The Bears are a perfect landing spot. Plus, Cristall got a taste of that in the playoff run. Didn't play, but just being there matters. And another thing, interview that I saw with him is, I think it was the Break the Ice podcast with Mike Vogel as well, is he said that, I didn't play, but I got to kind of soak up the vibe. I got to hang out with guys that were, competing for the Calder Cup playoffs, that kind of thing. It was exciting. And I think that you can learn something from that, even if you're not on the ice. It was a big thing. Now, the team made it clear they want him playing pro hockey this year. And a key to that success is skating. Like I said earlier, the biggest knock on him was his skating was subpar. He lacked quick bursts of speed. But Cristall actually went out and hired coaches to address that situation. And it's paid off. If you saw him at development camp, he definitely has some giddy up in his step. And he's improving. Coaches say the data is trending the right way, and Cristall is owning it. He said, quote, "It's gone up every year, and that's all you can ask. Improvement, right?" I don't think that, he's going to turn into Ethan Frank overnight. But if he can at least have the wheels that it's going to be necessary to play in the NHL, that's a big enough thing in and of itself. But you take a look at him, he is trending in the right direction. The bottom line here is Cristall's right there. And alongside Ivan Miroshnichenko, who's already got NHL games under his belt, those are your two most likely young forwards to crack the Caps roster this season. And when I say that, I think that it is a foregone conclusion, of course, that Ryan Leonard is going to be on this team. And just think about that for a minute. Zoom out a little bit on that. A team that has Miro, Cristall, and Leonard. A bit of a risky thing, and I get that it is no slam dunk that these young players are going to take to it like a fish to water. As we saw last season in the playoffs, that Ryan Leonard, the hope was that he was just going to jump straight to the moon. Wasn't the case. And I think that we need to create realistic expectations, and the people that cover the team, myself included, need to create realistic expectations that even if they make the roster, it is not going to necessarily be right to the top right away. But the good thing about the Capitals is they're going to have time in development camp, in the preseason games, which, there's not going to be as many as there was in previous years, but that they're going to get a good opportunity to see what these players have in the tank. If Cristall can duplicate any of the kind of success that he had last training camp, in this development camp or training camp, then I think he is in a good position. Again, right there. The Capitals were really kind of torn on what to do, right? That, do we want to burn the first year of his deal? And do we want to send him back to the juniors? There was a real rift, I guess you could say. And as a guy that covers this team, I remember last season, I was thinking to myself, he needs to really make this team. But a big picture, getting in the extra development in Kelowna and Spokane served him well. And I think he's truly in a great position to hit the ground running in the fall, and expect him to be on the ice in game one of the 25-26 season. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about prospect philosophy. There is a common trend with the young players on the team. What is that trend? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment here, we're talking about the Capitals as they have killed it in the draft the last few years, and you're starting to notice some trends. And there's a couple different trends, but the biggest trend that we've noticed is the Capitals are drafting, generally speaking, bigger players, big frames, grit, heavy hockey. I think that is going to be part of the identity of the Capitals in years to come, and that's a good identity. As you saw that, and when I say big frames, grit, heavy hockey, there's got to be some tough guys in there as well. And you take a look at it, there are some players that have some snarl to their game. Of course, Tom Wilson, Ryan Leonard, these kind of guys. And it's interesting that you look at the Philadelphia Flyers, they actually hired someone to teach their players to be better fighters. Kind of a laughable moment, but in any event, the Capitals, big frames, will be able to take on the likes of these big players in the NHL, and it starts right away with Ryan Leonard, then Tarek Parasek, and now Lynden Lakovic. That top-end talent, all of it plays with bite, chippy, physical, smart off the boards. They're not all burners. They're not all flashy skill, but they fit the system. They're not all freaks in the analytics department as far as goals, that kind of thing. They're not, all Connor Bedards. They're not all Macklin Celebrinis, but these guys are dynamic players that I think in some ways are more well-rounded than some of the players that were drafted higher. And it doesn't stop in the first round, because if you take at the late round gems, I guess you could say Cole Hutson, of course, younger brother of Lane Hutson in Montreal, absolutely torched the NCAA with 48 points in 39 games as a defenseman at 18. Ponder that. Think about that for a while. That is something. That's wild. And his play style, smooth, smart, creative, but also very composed in his own zone. Future power play quarterback, potentially. Cole Hutson, I didn't mention him in this episode until now, but another big player that's going to be in the next wave of the Capitals. And, talking about one brother, Cole Hutson and Lane Hutson, how about two brothers playing on the same organization? How about Ilya Protas? And, I remember when he was drafted, I was thinking, Lexi is a good player. What are the odds that Ilya is going to be a decent player as well? Well, as it turns out, he's pretty good. The younger brother, and he's a monster, 6'5", scored 50, count them, 50 goals in the OHL. 50. The skating is coming along, and he's got legit top six upside. The Protas pipeline is real. And that's what I'm talking about. There's no clunkers in there. That if you want to just talk about wave after wave after wave of great players that is going to be on this team at some point, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think that this team is going to be perennially good for years and years to come. And we have Ross Mahoney, the scouts, Brian McClellan, and now Chris Patrick to thank for that, as this team is absolutely stacked and will be for years to come. But if you even want to take a look a little bit deeper, Jackson Crowder, fifth pick, big frame, responsible game, and Aaron Dahlqvist, the Swedish D who hits everything that moves. That it's good that there is a defender in there, as we're talking primarily forwards here. So I've talked to you about a couple defenders here, that it's good. And, I'm not talking about it in this particular segment here, but the goalie pipeline as well, that this team from the NHL all the way down to the ECHL, the development leagues, whether it's juniors or overseas, is going to be something. But you take a look at Dahlqvist. Some scouts had him going in the third round. The Caps got him in the sixth. That is straight up robbery. And the Capitals were able to pull that off. That is something. Now, this whole thing isn't random. The Caps are building something very intentional. They have this team leaning into a system. They're not chasing skill for skill's sake. They want guys who can survive in playoff hockey. One of the knocks against the Capitals is they can make it to the playoffs, and for the longest time, they can't make it past the first round. This past season, they made it to the second round, but still got flamed out in quite a bit of a hurry against the Hurricanes. This team needs to be built to make a deep push, and dare I say a Stanley Cup. And they got the guy right now in Spencer Carberry, pushing the buttons, pulling the strings, that this team is poised to do great things. So whether it's Lakovic, Cristall, Miroshnichenko, or Cole Hutson, someone's got to be calling in the next 12 to 18 months. Some of these players are more NHL ready than others. I get that. But there is the distinct possibility that we could see Cristall, Miroshnichenko this season. A little bit further out is Lakovic and Cole Hutson. But I don't think Cole Hutson is too far out. And you take a look at Lakovic as well. A lot of it is wait and see. What kind of season does he have next season? The Capitals, the organization is going to keep their eyes on him, that it is an exciting storyline to follow. But when you take a look at the players that are poised to do great things for this team, in years past, it seems to me that you would talk about one player here or one player there, that, there's this really great guy, one singular person. But I could do a whole episode on top tier drafts, prospects for the Capitals that will be absolute game changers. If that doesn't get you excited as a Capitals fan, I don't know what will. And it's not like the Capitals are, the Nationals right now. If you're a baseball fan, that they're horrible right now. The Capitals are really good right now. They're just going to get that much better, if you can believe it. So it is exciting, and it's the right tactic. The people that are in charge with the Capitals have their eyes, they have their finger on the pulse of this organization, that they see this team aging out. And we already saw that with Oshie and Backstrom and Kuzi getting out of town, and very well could be the last season of Ovechkin and Karlsson, that the pillars, the DNA of this team is moving on. They need to create a new identity. And it's going to be players like Leonard and Cristall that are going to be the new heartbeat of this team. They will create a new identity. And that's exciting for me. And, I know some Capitals fans look at it and it's a bit sad. And it's sad for me as well, as you see these pillars that have been on this team for years, getting ready to ride out into the sunset. Fear not, as I have discussed in this episode, that the future is very, very bright for this organization. That this season will be an interesting season to see how the Capitals perform. What's the future of Ovechkin and Karlsson? And just be ready to bring on that next wave of truly great Capitals players. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.